enterprise can issue bonds without an election. Now, they're revenue bonds, not bonds covered by taxes. And then the other thing is multiple fiscal year direct and indirect debt or other financial obligation. We're going to see that in our 2016 transaction. I'll explain what that is. Okay, so when the developer went to El Paso County with its service plan, it itemized what the improvements were going to be put in and how much they were going to cost. They have to have an engineer look at this thing and come up with a plan and everything, so as accurate as can be possible. In El Paso, as I indicated, imposes certain standards and limitations. One that they imposed on this district is the debt authorization. Up to $5 million for the lease and purchase of water rights. No general obligation bond indebtedness. They wouldn't allow any general obligation bond. That's the indebtedness paid for with taxes. In fact, you don't have a mill levy, I don't believe. It was designed that way to begin with. The county commissioners didn't want there to be a mill levy on this property. Now, later in 2000, as you can see, there's quite a difference between $20 million in improvements and $5 million debt limitation. We're going to get to a distinction with debt and non-debt here in a second. But on that $5 million, in 2000 it was increased to $16 million too. So in addition, like I say, the limitations imposed by Tabor and the service plan, and there's a prohibition of general obligation bonds. So what we had to do to get the level of financing that we have is come up with non-debt financial obligations. And the distinction under our Constitution is that an obligation that obligates future boards, in other words, it's in more than one fiscal year, is a debt and has to be approved by election. So what we come up with, what has been developed over the years is some lease purchase financing, which is annually renewable. In other words, the board has to every year renew the lease, and the district has the legal right to walk away from the lease. Of course, they lose the property that's financed by it, but that's actually the court requires that to be a requirement in order to keep it out of the debt category. Well, I meant to say, if you have any questions along the way, just feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so we started, in '96 was the first time we did a financing, and it was a taxable financing. And what we try to achieve for savings is tax exempt financing, and that means that the bonds are issued legally and under state law, and that the interest paid on the bonds is exempt from federal taxation. What that does is the investors will allow the interest rate to be lower because they don't have to pay taxes on the income from those bonds. And when I use the term bonds, that's a generic term. We've got all sorts of different forms of obligations out there. So you're going to hear certificates of participation. It's treated just the same as a bond, same regulations and everything. So we did probably 10 or 12 transactions over the years between 1995 and 2009. In 2000, we set up a nonprofit corporation. It's called the 6320 Corporation. It's named after its revenue wing that allows its bonds, if they're issued on behalf of a governmental entity, to be tax exempt. So we had a nonprofit corporation, which is the PFA, for that term, called the Woodland Hills Public Facilities Authority. And it's a nonprofit corporation, and it's a Internal Revenue Code 501c3 organization. And it can issue bonds, build facilities for the district, and then lease those to the district. And the bonds will be tax exempt. And when the bonds are paid off, the facilities are then deeded over to the district. And the corporation can either go away or not. I mean, you might have future financings you want to do with it, which was the case in here. So we had nonprofit corporation bonds, PFA, and we had a number of lease purchase transactions. And that's where you get a lessor to own property and lease it to the district on this annually renewable basis. And then either the lease is sold to a bank as a whole, or we may certificate it. And that means issuing certificates of participation in the income stream from that lease, and they're just like bonds. They're just called certificates. So we had a number of those outstanding, and in 2009, they were all consolidated into 3 issues. Water and wastewater enterprise revenue bonds, certificates of participation for the rec facilities, and for the that was a lease.
It's a lease.
Yeah, those were for rec facilities. And they did some recreational facility revenue bonds also. So at that point, we had a total of $21,768,000 outstanding. Now, one important distinction on these different instruments is that the water revenue bonds and the recreation revenue bonds all are within that 16 million to cap that was imposed in 2000. Well, imposed at 5 to begin with, and then amended to 16.2. And we always had to keep that debt, even though it's not debt in the constitutional sense. The county commissioners thought of it as debt, and most people do. It's a financial obligation within that 16 million too. And then the lease is definitely not debt in the constitutional sense, so we had more flexibility in working with that number. So in 2016, the district had progressed economically, and it was actually being run very well in the lenders' eyes. Mr. Stinson asked me tonight if the district's making progress, and they really are. When we restructured all financial obligations in 2016, the interest rate went from 8% down to 2.75%. So it saves you a lot in interest cost. They also had enough confidence in this district that they lent another $11 million toward the new sewer plant. So,
and a $5 million discount.
I'm sorry?
And a $5 million discount.
Yeah, well, yes. The bond owners, but when the district first started, Greg Fulton was the investment banker, and he actually got a group of investors together that had faith that this was going to work. And the first time I visited out here, there was nothing, just dirt. And he got these investors to buy bonds on the dirt, basically. And that was 8%. Now, that sounds high today, but in 1995, it was not too far off the market, but there's also the risk element that determines interest rates. So it wasn't unreasonable in 1995. When we got up to, came through that recession, interest rates hit the rock bottom. The investors refused to lower the interest rates, as you might understand. And, but the district engaged D.A. Davidson, who found an investor who was willing to dramatically lower the interest rate. But we had to convince and by this time, some of the bonds were actually in trouble because the district was having some financial difficulties and that sort of thing. But we were able to convince, the financial advisor was able to convince his bond owners to take a discount of $5 million on what they were owed. So you save $5 million there, plus the interest rate dropped from 8% to 2.75%. And what we came out with then, in the end, was enterprise revenue bonds and enterprise lease purchase. 2 separate transactions, because we needed to keep this one under that $16.2 million lid that's in your service plan. And so we took the $16.2 million in revenue bonds, the $19.215 million in lease purchase, and came up with a total financing of $35.415 million. And the district had funds to put in, so they didn't have to borrow the extra $2 million. And then we separately finance these things. This was the refunding, oh, now anyway, let me talk about refunding escrow. The 17,415,000 went into a refunding escrow. It was a very short-term escrow, just to get the old bonds in, and they were being paid out from the escrow. So sometimes you refund bonds that have 2 or 3 years to go before they are mature, and you have to create a longer escrow. But in this case, we just created for a short period of time to get all the bonds in. Some people are by now living in Arizona, and their bonds are at a safe deposit box in Denver, and we just couldn't get them all together for the day of closing. So we put that 17,415,082 in the refunding escrow full to pay off the old bonds and certificates of participation. And then on the lease side, on the lease side, that was 19,570,975. 11 million of that right there went into your wastewater plant project fund. And we had to get some refunding proceeds out of here too, because again, we had to keep this at 16 million too. So we refunded some of the outstanding obligations from proceeds of the enterprise lease purchase. And then the lender did require that we set up a reserve fund. So you got $1,471,725 reserve fund. So the total for the two issues went to finance these things. So uses equal the sources. $37,415,000. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
If you folks remember, last week I said understanding bonds is the black art. It ain't simple. If you ask questions, if you're embarrassed to ask a question because you think, well, it's going to sound stupid, don't. Okay? Please ask the question, because it isn't. If you don't understand, there's nothing wrong with that. This is a very difficult process.
Yeah, I've got a question. So originally it looks like, from what I'm gathering, I am not minded this way. The district was in debt 20 million, and now we're in debt 37 million. Is this normal for districts of this magnitude to carry this debt for so long, refinancing? I mean,
very difficult.
you said you've been with us 20 years. I've been in the neighborhood 2.5 years, so I don't know these things, but to me, 20 years, 2 million, seems like there should have been more progress, or maybe
Well,
I'm reading the progress wrong.
Okay, that 21,768,000 wasn't the total amount that the bond owners were owed. That's right. So added 5 million onto that. So you were really in debt 27 million. Okay.
So then the other 11 comes from essentially the new wastewater plant, and what I'm seeing kind of the differences in the financing and moving around of things. Am I doing my math? 27, the 37 is like 10.
Well, that's the other 11 million is for the new
Correct.
wastewater plant.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So, but there has been a considerable amount paid down over the years too.
Okay.
But it's not unusual because the facility is 25 years old.
I guess I just see the end game. Like, okay, we're still in debt, and maybe I'm more of a short term.
And if I remember correctly, the sewer plant was originally built in '88. And Woodman Hills took it over through some negotiations in '95, '96. So it was already old, you know, when the district got it.
Okay.
And then it was failing to meet the state effluent requirements, and it's going to be more of a regional facility, I believe. So it's treating other wastewater too.
Okay.
Eric, would you explain how the 8% interest was divided in effect and nothing went to the principal?
Oh, I'm not sure what you mean by divided.
Well, 8%, 4 was paid and 4 was accrued.
At some point, yes.
Yes.
It
And
was.
no money went to the principal when it was paid.
Well, that's right, and that's when the district was having an economic problem. And the bond owners did let 4% interest accrue, and that added to principal, of course. And then you're paying more because the principal's bigger.
How you doing? I just wanted to ask you a question. You related to a $5 million, the word's been used in the district, it's called a $5 million haircut for accrued interest. Was that deferred interest or interest that was straight interest? Because there's been a little discussion about that on my site, and I want to make sure we undo whatever it is I put on there to be accurate. But the haircut that they took, was it deferred or not deferred?
Well,
Deferred, like, okay, you said accrued, it kept accruing interest?
I think it was all interest,
Okay.
none of principal.
Okay, and then just a question. You said that all of the debt that we have, you mentioned the PFA, the Woodman Hills Public Facility Authority, which was the nonprofit organization set up to handle infrastructure within and with outside of the district itself, has a debt. Are we obligated for that debt?
No,
So we're,
your
how,
obligation was in the lease of the property to the district for its use.
okay, so on the is that $5.863 million lease?
Yes.
Okay, when we paid off the last bonds, $5.863 million was paid off to the PFA, and I'm assuming that was to cover the COP? Because on the tax return that they had, that I was able to locate online, it was paid off.
This $5,863,000 was the, certificates of participation, that I'm virtually positive that was for the one of the rec centers.
Well, the 2.9 is for the rec centers, the 1315 is for the water wastewater plant, but in the COP that's listed on the tax return for the Woodman Hills Public Facility Authority, the nonprofit organization you mentioned early on, that is listed as an obligation or a lease.
Okay, that's where we took the PFA, and instead of doing revenue bonds, which I described earlier, it did a lease, it built the facilities and leased them to the district. That was the lease purchase agreement.
Yes, sir. So the PFA debt obligation that's under the PFA is not the obligation of Woodman Hills?
The obligation was the lease.
Okay, besides the lease, there's bonds listed showing that they came back to Woodman Hills, as I found on EMMA, the Electronic Mutual Funds site, showing that, I'm just trying to, want to make sure when I write this down, I got it correct, that's all. It's not listed on here, but you did say PFA early on, and you talked about transactions, there wasn't an exact number, you said 6320 Corporation, PFA and the 501(c). And so I'm just wondering if the reason why I'm saying this is I've posted this on my website, either accurate or inaccurate. I don't want to post it inaccurate. So if we're not obligated to pay the PFA debt, and they're a nonprofit organization that's run by some of the developers, unfortunately, and people that have a vested interest in this district, and we're not obligated, I'm just trying to find out if we are or are not, because then my question will be later on for the board, obviously, because then I can better speak to it. So I'm just why I'm asking you. I don't have the tax document here to give you. I wish I did. I could show you. I could give it to you later, but then I'd still maybe request later on you explain it to me a little better now than instead of here on a phone call. Explain to me how it is that debt's accumulated and it's being paid off by money that we're paying to the PFA according to the check ledger I received last year showing payments as a conduit to the PFA, which has been a thing that people have been saying is either accurate or inaccurate. I don't want to be inaccurate, so I've been inaccurate this long. I want to make it accurate. Does that help you?
Well, I think so.
Okay.
This is where I don't want to call it fiction, but the bonds of the PFA are not the obligation of the district.
Super.
What was the obligation was the lease of
Okay.
those facilities to the district. And that's the only revenue source that the nonprofit corporation has for paying its bonds off. So
Tap fees?
legally, the bonds are not the district's responsibility, and never were.
Okay. All right.
Lease of the equipment and facilities.
Super. Excellent. Great clarification.
And that's the one that is annually renewable,
Okay.
and therefore is not debt in the constitutional sense.
All right, great, because I'll bring it up next meeting. And then you said there was a financial difficulty in 2016. As I'm aware, I've been here.
Not in 16, no, much earlier.
Okay, when,
Early 2000s.
okay, was that with us or? Okay, you were